The text from my mother came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, right as I was finishing a double shift at the elementary school where I work as a teacher's aide. I was sitting in the parking lot with the heat running because it was 32 degrees outside and my car takes forever to warm up, and I was eating a granola bar because I hadn't had time for an actual meal since 6 that morning. That's when my phone lit up. We're thinking of doing Thanksgiving at Grandma's place this year. Just immediate family, small gathering. I read it 3 times. Then I looked up at the dark windshield and I thought, okay, that's fine. Grandma's house is small. Maybe they just want to keep it intimate. Then my sister texted 30 seconds later. You'll still make the sweet potato casserole and the mac and cheese, right? You know Grandma can't do all that standing anymore. I set my phone face down on the passenger seat. I finished my granola bar. I drove home. It took me 2 more days to understand what small gathering, immediate family actually meant. I had to ask my mother directly, standing in her kitchen on a Thursday evening while she was unloading her dishwasher, not looking at me. Is Owen invited? I asked. She stacked a plate. Honey, you know how Grandma gets overwhelmed. Owen is my son. He's 7 years old. He has sensory processing disorder and ADHD, and he is the loudest, brightest, most exhausting and wonderful human being I have ever met. He drums on the table when he's happy. He cries at the sound of the smoke alarm. He needs things in a specific order or the whole day falls apart. He is also deeply, relentlessly kind. The kind of kid who apologizes to furniture when he bumps into it, who cried for a week when the class fish died. He's 7, I said. My mother closed the dishwasher. It's just that last year was a lot. He knocked over Grandma's figurine shelf. He was startled by the dog. I know, sweetheart. It's just easier this way. Easier. That word sat in my chest like a stone. I drove home and got Owen bathed and into bed, and then I sat on the edge of my kitchen counter at 10:30 at night, and I did the math in my head. I had been making that sweet potato casserole for 9 years. I'd been making the mac and cheese from scratch, the one with the 3-cheese roux and the breadcrumb top, since Owen was a baby and I used to park his bouncy seat on the kitchen floor next to me while I grated cheese. I had driven 40 minutes each way to my grandmother's house every Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter since my divorce. I had brought wine and a dessert in 3 years ago, a new shower curtain rod because I noticed hers was pulling out of the wall, and I installed it myself while everyone else was watching football. I had loaned my mother $800 when her car needed brake work, and I hadn't asked for it back. I had taken my sister's kids for a whole weekend in March, so she and her husband could go to Savannah for their anniversary. But my son knocked over a shelf, so he wasn't invited. And they still wanted the casserole. I almost did it. That's the part I'm most ashamed of. For about 4 days, I almost just made the food and dropped it off and swallowed the whole thing whole, the way I'd been swallowing things for the better part of a decade. I had gotten very good at swallowing, at telling myself it wasn't worth the fight, at showing up anyway because showing up was what you did for family, even when family didn't show up for you. What stopped me was Owen. He came into the kitchen on Saturday morning while I was having coffee, and he climbed up onto the bar stool next to me and said, "Mama, are we going to Grandma's for Thanksgiving this year?" And I looked at him. His hair sticking up on one side, his dinosaur pajamas, the little gap in his teeth where he'd lost his bottom incisor 2 weeks ago, and I didn't know how to answer him. "We're figuring it out," I said. He nodded very seriously. "Last year Baxter scared me," he said. Baxter was my grandmother's neighbor's dog who had gotten loose in the yard. But I said sorry about the shelf. I said sorry like 3 times. "I know you did, buddy." "Do they know I said sorry?" I put my coffee cup down. "Yeah," I said, "they know." He slid off the stool and went to go watch his cartoons, and I sat there in my kitchen and something shifted. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like a hinge somewhere inside me finally gave out. Not dramatically, not with a bang, just a quiet metal snap of something that had been under too much pressure for too long. My son said sorry 3 times. He was 6 years old and startled by a dog, and he said sorry 3 times, and it still wasn't enough for them. I thought about what I'd been telling my 2nd graders all year during our feelings curriculum. We don't have to stay in places that make us feel small. I had made a whole bulletin board about it. Cut out little paper feet to represent taking steps toward people who treat us with kindness. I had 32 7-year-olds who could tell me that we deserve to be around people who make room for us. My own family couldn't make room for my kid. I texted my mother that Sunday morning. We won't be able to make it to Thanksgiving this year. I also won't be able to bring the food. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday. She called within 6 minutes. I let it go to voicemail. My sister texted, "Are you serious right now? Grandma is counting on the mac and cheese." My mother left a voicemail that was 4 minutes long, and the gist of it was, I was being dramatic. I was making this about myself. Owen would be fine. He just needed to learn to handle things better. She hadn't meant to hurt my feelings. She was just trying to manage expectations. Why was I always so sensitive? I listened to the whole thing, standing in my backyard while Owen kicked leaves around near the fence. Then I put my phone in my pocket and I went and kicked leaves of him for a while. That was 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. In those 2 weeks, my aunt called to tell me I was breaking my grandmother's heart. My sister sent me a 7-paragraph text about how I was punishing the whole family for one comment. My mother called 4 more times. On the 5th call, I picked up and I said very calmly, "I love you, and I'm not going to talk about this anymore until after the holidays. Owen and I need some space." She cried. She said she didn't understand what had happened to me. I said, "I know." I hung up. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, when my family was gathered at my grandmother's house eating the mac and cheese my sister apparently ended up ordering from a restaurant, which, fine, good, whatever, Owen and I drove 3 hours north to a cabin I'd rented in the Smoky Mountains. It was the first time I'd spent actual money on myself in I don't know how long. The cabin cost $340 for 3 nights. I had been anxious about spending it. I had looked at my savings account and thought about all the things that money could go toward, and then I thought about Owen's face when he asked me if they knew he'd said sorry. I booked the cabin. We got there at dusk, and Owen stood on the porch and looked at the mountains and said, "Mama? Mama, there's so many trees." "I know, bud." "Are there bears?" "Probably not near the cabin." "But maybe?" "Maybe." He thought about this. "Okay," he said, and went inside to investigate the loft, which had 2 twin beds and a skylight, and I heard him yell from upstairs, "Mama, there's a skylight!" in that way that he has, like everything is the best news he's ever received. I sat down on the porch steps and I let myself cry for about 10 minutes. Not the ugly kind, just the kind that comes when something you've been holding finally gets set down. Then I went inside and we made grilled cheese on the little stovetop and watched a nature documentary about mountains, and Owen fell asleep on the couch with his head on my knee, and I didn't move for 2 hours because I didn't want to wake him. Thanksgiving morning, we drove into the nearest town and ate at a diner where they were doing a full Thanksgiving plate for $14.99, and the waitress gave Owen a paper pilgrim hat and called him Sir. And he wore that hat for the rest of the day with complete seriousness. We went on a short trail after, one of the accessible ones, because Owen doesn't do well with unpredictable terrain. But it had a creek, and he found 4 perfect skipping stones and a piece of quartz, and he carried the quartz in his coat pocket the rest of the afternoon. That evening, I called my best friend, who lives in Portland now, and she answered on the second ring and said, "How is it?" "Good," I said, and I meant it. Really good. "How's Owen?" "He found quartz." She laughed. Of course he did. We talked for an hour, while Owen did a puzzle at the table, occasionally calling out facts about whatever he was assembling. "Did you know the Grand Canyon is a mile deep? Did you know it took 5 million years to form?" I passed the information along to my friend, and she responded with appropriate awe each time, and I thought, this is what family is supposed to feel like. People who make room. People who find you interesting instead of inconvenient. My mother texted on Thanksgiving evening, "I hope you and Owen are having a nice holiday. I miss you." I looked at it for a long time. I didn't respond that night. When we drove home Sunday afternoon, Owen slept in the back seat most of the way, the piece of quartz clenched in his fist even in sleep. I had the radio on low and the mountains were behind us, and I thought about the last 9 years, the cooking, the driving, the showing up, the swallowing. I thought about the $800 I'd loaned my mother and never gotten back. I thought about the anniversary weekend I'd taken my sister's kids so she could go to Savannah. I thought about the 3 cheese roux and grating all that cheddar on the kitchen floor next to Owen's bouncy seat, back when he was small enough to fit in it, when I was 26 and freshly divorced and terrified and trying so hard to hold everything together for everyone all at once. I thought about how no one had ever once asked if I was okay. I'm not saying my family is evil. They're not. They're just people who got used to me absorbing things, and they never had to notice they were doing it because I never made them. I kept showing up. I kept cooking. I kept driving and loaning and giving and swallowing, and they just kept receiving because I let them. That part is on me. I've been sitting with that. I texted my mother back 3 days after Thanksgiving. I love you. I need some time and space to think about what I want our relationship to look like going forward. I'm not angry, but some things need to change for me to feel okay about holidays as a family. I'll reach out when I'm ready to talk. She didn't respond for 2 days. Then she sent, okay, I love you too. Take the time you need. It was the most she'd ever given me without a fight. Christmas this year was small. I have a coworker, a woman named June who has been teaching at our school for 20 years and who raised her daughter alone after her husband left, and she invited Owen and me to her place. Her daughter came with her boyfriend, and June's neighbor brought his 2 kids, and it was maybe 9 people total in a small house with a real tree and garland on the banister, and a game of Scrabble that got very competitive by 8 p.m. Owen sat next to June's neighbor's youngest, a girl named Abby, who is also 7, and who, according to Owen's post-evening debrief on the drive home, knows a lot about bugs. They spent most of the party under the dining room table with a flashlight and a field guide June had produced from somewhere. Nobody made them come out. Nobody told them they were too loud or too much or in the way. At one point, June's daughter looked under the table and said, "You two okay down there?" Owen said, "We're identifying specimens." She said, "Carry on," and closed the tablecloth back down. On the way home, Owen fell asleep in the back seat again. He always falls asleep in the car, always has, even as a baby. And I drove through the quiet streets with the Christmas lights still on in people's yards, blue and white and gold, and I thought about the word enough. I thought about how I had spent so long trying to be enough for people who had already decided what I was worth, how I had cooked and driven and given and smiled and swallowed, and it hadn't mattered. Because the problem was never what I was doing. The problem was that I had made myself small enough to fit into a space that was never actually meant for me. Owen is enough. He has always been enough. The fact that he said sorry 3 times and it still didn't open a door for him, that's not a reflection of who he is. That's a reflection of the door. I learned that this year took me long enough. My grandmother called in January. We talked for 40 minutes about her garden and a book she was reading and what Owen was doing in school. She didn't bring up Thanksgiving. Neither did I. At the end of the call, she said, "I hope you'll come see me this spring." I said, "I'd like that." We're going in April. Just the 2 of us driving up. Owen and me, bringing her flowers from the nursery because she can't get out to the garden the way she used to. We'll have lunch, and I'll fix whatever's broken. And we'll leave before dinner so Owen doesn't get overstimulated. And maybe that's what things look like going forward. Smaller, quieter, chosen. The people who see you. The people who make room. The people who, when a 7-year-old says sorry 3 times, say, "I know, sweetheart. Don't worry about it and mean it." The quartz is sitting on Owen's windowsill now, next to his dinosaur figures and a shell he found at the beach 2 summers ago. He told his class about it for show and tell. He explained how quartz forms underground over thousands of years, how the conditions have to be exactly right, how sometimes you just find it in a creek when you're not even looking. His teacher told me afterward that the other kids were completely rapt. Of course they were. He's always been exactly that, the kind of person who makes the ordinary feel worth paying attention to. I'm just finally starting to take notes. I keep coming back to something Owen said the morning everything became clear to me. He climbed onto the bar stool, hair sideways, dinosaur pajamas, and asked if they knew he'd said sorry. Not once, 3 times. He was 6 years old, and he was already doing the work that the adults in that room had never bothered to do. That's what I think about when people ask me if I regret how I handled it. I don't. Because the thing I finally understood that morning is that the way we treat people is a choice, every single time. My family chose, repeatedly and without much apparent discomfort, to make my son feel like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. And I had been so focused on keeping the peace that I never stopped to ask what that peace was costing him. There's a version of keeping the peace that's actually just absorbing damage on behalf of everyone else. I did that for 9 years. I told myself it was love, some of it was, but some of it was fear dressed up as generosity. Fear of being difficult. Fear of the silence after the argument. Fear of being the one who broke something. The irony is that nothing was actually intact. The thing I was so afraid of breaking had already been broken. I just hadn't let myself see it yet. What I've had to reckon with is my own part in it. I made it easy for people to take from me by never making it uncomfortable to do so. That's not a reason to blame myself. I understand now that this is what happens when you grow up learning that your value is tied to what you provide. But it is something I have to be honest about if I want things to actually change. Awareness is only useful if you do something with it. I had to get smart about where my energy was going, clear-eyed about which relationships were genuinely mutual and which ones were just comfortable arrangements where I happened to be the one doing most of the giving. And then there's Owen. Watching him on that porch in the Smokies, looking at those mountains like they were the best thing he'd ever seen, saying okay to the possibility of bears with complete equanimity, that took more courage than anything I managed that year. He doesn't know that. He was just being himself. But that's the thing about kids who have to work harder to move through the world. They develop a kind of resilience that most people spend their whole lives trying to manufacture. Owen has faced more confusing situations by age 7 than many adults face in a decade, and he still finds quartz in creek beds and brings it home in his fist. I want to be more like that. Not naive, not unaware of how hard things can be, but genuinely able to look at a mountain and think, okay. To move forward anyway. To find the thing worth keeping in an ordinary afternoon and hold on to it, even in sleep. That's what I'm working on now. Being a person who doesn't wait for permission to take up space. Being honest when something isn't working, instead of filling the silence with casserole dishes. Being present for the people who are actually present for me. June. My friend in Portland, the version of my grandmother who calls and asks about Owen's school, and doesn't need me to be anything other than her granddaughter. I don't know exactly what my family looks like going forward. Some of those relationships might come back around in a healthier shape, some might not. Either way, I think I finally understand that love isn't measured by how much you're willing to endure. It's measured by what you choose and what you choose to protect. I choose Owen. I choose the quartz on the windowsill and the skylight in the loft and the $14.99 Thanksgiving plate with the paper pilgrim hat. I choose the people who make room. Everything else can wait.